Okay, I want to spend just a few minutes on the French and Indian War. Some of this I went over in class the other day. So if you've watched that video that I put up for Wednesday, then you've seen some of this. But I want to go back and kind of make sure that everybody understands how important this really is. We have seen that the French have a different pattern of settlement. The French they have not come over here in great numbers. They come over here mostly as traders, as fur traders, as really as not necessarily as settlers. And so they have not established themselves in big numbers in big places. Now, there are some major French places by 1750. We already talked about Montreal and Quebec are right here. Louisbourg is right here. All right. And the French have this pretty major presence right here along the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, the St. Lawrence River up here, the Great Lakes, okay, and the central part of the United States. So this is this is a big area for the French to have settled. Okay, so Quebec, Montreal, and that's why their population density isn't really big out here. There are a lot more British settlers here on the East Coast than there are French out here in Quebec and Montreal, all right, Louisbourg and other places. The French are good at the French are really good at making acquaintances here in the among the Native Americans. I told you that they were trading with the Native Americans. They've done a great job of really gaining a foothold here in America. But I also told you that the French have done a very poor job of dealing with international relations. That Louis XIV had fought 4 major wars. There's actually 2 before you see on this chart. All right, the third is actually the War of the League of Augsburg right here, and the fourth is the War of Spanish Succession. So Louis has actually fought 4 major wars in Europe that have also spilled over here into the colonies as colonial wars between the French and the English. After Louis's death, the French and the English continue to struggle with one another. Okay, you have the War of Austrian Succession here, which becomes King George's War in America. But I told you, and we focused on this the other day, that this war right here is the one that we have to pay attention to. This is here in America, all right, the French and Indian War. And if you notice the dates over here, you realize that this war starts here in America and then spills back over into Europe. This is a big deal, okay? And I kind of hinted at it in the lecture, but I want to go back and kind of make sure that you understand why this is so important, because this puts the British in a different position. You look up here, you notice that the French have control of a huge portion of North America. But without a whole lot of people to settle it, then they are struggling. Okay, and how do they fortify this? How do they keep this area on their own? Well, to make matters worse, the English and the English colonists over here, and I mentioned this in that last lecture, they're not being governed. They're not being overseen by England very well. It's the period of that salutary neglect that I told you about. So there's a lot of smuggling going on. There's a lot of things going on, okay? And there's still gripes between the English and the French. It leads to minor conflicts. It leads to serious conflicts. Okay, for example, in 1739, you have the War of Jenkins' Ear. the War of Jenkins Ear is a war that it starts out kind of minorly. Okay, it's a conflict really between the British and the Spanish, and it led to a little conflict between the English and the Spanish over trading rights here in America. But if you guys notice, I told you that these wars spill over into Europe. Here in America, the New Englanders and the British will actually manage to gain control of Louisburg right up here. So this area right up here, okay? And it's these areas, they're important fishing waters. They're important other things as well for the guards, if you kind of guards the whole Gulf of St. Lawrence here and the St. Lawrence River. Now, eventually, all right, the British will give it back. But I want you to kind of understand that the relations here are, they're really not all that great, okay? So when the British take Louisburg, that is, and along with the New Englanders, all right, that was a big deal. When the British give it back to the French, the Americans felt really betrayed by that, and they don't trust the British as much as maybe they need to. Now, I told you guys that by 1750, the relationship between England and France is so bad that the French realize they've got to fortify this area. And they're going to start fortifying some of these areas out here to try to keep the British out of their holdings. And that's what's going to lead to our first clash in 1754. Our old buddy George Washington, who is a military officer, a militia officer for Virginia, is out here exploring with a survey team where he runs across a French fort being built, all right, right here where the Monongahela, the Allegheny River come together to form the Ohio. Okay, today that is where Pittsburgh is, but this is Fort Duquesne, and Washington sort of staggers out here and says, "Hey, wait a minute, what are these guys doing?" Well, the French bring him in. They talk to him for a little while. They give him some food, and then they basically say, "You've got to get out of here, or we're going to kill you all." So Washington actually retreats a little bit further south here to this little fort right here called Fort Necessity. And he will try to fortify himself there against an impending French attack, which does come and which forces Washington and his troops out of this area, and they end up marching their way back into Virginia. The British and the Virginia colonial governments and the British themselves, they don't take very kindly to this. And this is the incident in a lot of ways that leads to the beginning of the French and Indian War. What happens next is the British are going to react, and the British are going to call a colonial congress. They're going to summon representatives from the various colonies to meet in New York. And what they wanted to do was to get the colonies together and get them to talk about common defense. How are we going to get you guys? How are we going to get the colonies to defend themselves against France? Ben Franklin takes this opportunity to propose for the first time the potential of a colonial union. Okay. This is Franklin's famous cartoon, Join or Die. And you can see all the colonies up there, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, all right, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, or New England. And what he is encouraging them to do is to unite. Okay. So representatives from New England, from the New England colonies, plus New York, Maryland, and Pennsylvania are there. And it's the first real hint that, or the first real attempt at perhaps a union. It does not work. Okay, it doesn't happen. But the Albany Plan of Union is one of the first real attempts to get the colonies to think about themselves as a group rather than as individual colonies. So it does not work, though. In 1755, the British decide to get the French out of North America, and they dispatch this guy, General Braddock, to evict the French out of parts of Canada, the Ohio River Valley. Braddock is an old school officer. He is tough. He is rugged. He doesn't believe in any frills. Okay, he does not want, for example, to use Indian troops. He doesn't believe that they are they are worthwhile. He he's going to do his job, but he's very old school, and it's going to cost him. Okay, he will, for example, will lead attacks up here in Nova Scotia, end up booting some of the French Acadians out of this area. Now, some of those French Acadians will leave Nova Scotia and actually make their way all the way down here to Louisiana. And they will bring a different flavor to that part of Louisiana. And today, a lot of the descendants of these are Cajuns. Okay, that's where you get the, instead of Acadian, you call them, they became Cajuns. The Braddock from here he'll come down here to Virginia, and he's going to lead an expedition up here into the Ohio River Valley to attack Fort Duquesne. Okay, and Braddock is, like I told you guys, he is pretty old school. Okay, so Braddock is going to bring with him, all right, the about 1,400 or so British regulars. So well over 1,000. Some actually say he may even have officers, men, and colonial troops. He may have close to 2,000 men that he is going to set out with on the way to try to capture Fort Duquesne. So when you go back to the map here, I want to go back one here and look at this map here. Okay. So Braddock has got to march about 2,000 men from here in Virginia up here and then into the Ohio River Valley, up the Allegheny River, and into where Fort Duquesne is. This is virgin forest. This is mountainous. This is tough sledding. He essentially brings with him cannon that he has to cut a road for. Okay, and it's slow going. Washington is along with him as a volunteer officer, and Washington is steadily warning him that we're going to get ambushed, that bad things are going to happen. Braddock won't listen to him, and of course they get ambushed. Okay, in 1755, Braddock is and his troops are ambushed. It's one of the, really, in a lot of ways, it's one of the worst defeats that the British Army ever suffers. Braddock's ambush right outside of Fort Duquesne, it almost wipes them all out. Most of the officers are killed. Most of the troops are killed. Okay, only about, I think, a little over 300 make it out. And the only reason they make it out is because Washington takes over. And Washington had several horses shot out from under him, had 4 bullet holes in his coat, and he will lead the retreat and get them out of this area. Well, once that happens, the British are then going to take over, okay? And after Braddock's defeat here at Fort Duquesne, the British plan undergoes a little bit of a change, okay? And what happens next really is that, and we're going to kind of skip over this. It's not all that. I'll come back to this a little bit later. Okay, that the British are going to struggle for a year and a half until William Pitt becomes foreign minister. Pitt is the right man at the right time. He understands the colonies. Okay, he kind of understands what needs to happen. And what he does is he reaches out to the colonies and says, look, if you'll be loyal to us, if you'll cooperate with us militarily, we'll reimburse you for your costs. Okay, we will get you involved as an equal partner. And so Pitt essentially almost buys the colonial loyalty and gets them back involved in the war and gets them to help contribute to the British victory. So Pitt will technically become prime minister. He is an excellent prime minister, an excellent military guy. He's a statistics guy too, and he understands what needs to happen. Okay, so he will decide to shift the major attacks towards Canada. So instead of assaulting places in the American colonies, he decides to go right at the French at Quebec and Montreal. He picks young leaders, he gets them all involved, and then decides to go after the French in Canada. And so what happens next is in 1758, he'll capture Louisburg again. Okay, remember it had been captured one time already. All right, then he sends Wolfe, General Wolfe, to Quebec to attack Quebec. Both the British commander and the French commander, Marquis de Montcalm and Wolfe, will both die in the engagement outside of Quebec. And the French eventually are defeated and have to surrender Quebec. So notice what I was telling you. Instead of worried about trying to get the French out of here, okay, or even out of here, Pitt shifts his attack up here and pushes his way past Louisburg and all the way down here into Quebec and attacks Quebec first. Okay, it is probably one of the most important battles in North America, and turns the tide and eventually propels England to win. By 1760, Montreal falls, and the French are in big time trouble here in America. If you look up here, this is the Battle of Quebec. Okay. So the French forces are here. They're deployed right here. This is the French right here. And here are the English. And so you can see Quebec is right here. And even today, you guys can kind of see where the original fort at Quebec is. And if you look at the map here, so this is where the battle takes place. And the fort is right there. And out here was a place called the Plains of Abraham. And so that's where the forces deployed themselves out here, and it's where the battle was fought. So in 1763, France has very little choice. Excuse me, she's been beaten in Europe, she's been beaten in the colonies, and so in 1763, the war comes to a close. The Treaty of Paris is one of the most important treaties for this. It ends the French and Indian War, it ends the 7 Years' War back home in Europe. France loses everything. Okay, lost her Canadian possessions, most of her empire, most of the land. It loses all the lands east of the Mississippi River. Has virtually no presence in North America. Spain is a big winner, and England is a big winner. And so when you look at the map here, okay, and this is kind of just a recap here, okay? So look at the map and it becomes pretty clear, okay, that there's no French presence in North America after 1763. This green that you see here, this is all Spanish territory. The yellow is all English territory, and the French are the only really place they have left is Haiti right down here. And when you kind of go back, okay, this is America in 1754 at the beginning of the war. All that green area there is French area, okay, and by 1763, it's all gone, okay, except for that one little place right here in what is Haiti, okay. This changes everything, okay. There are some significant changes as a result of the war, okay. Who is mad because the French lost? All their Native American allies, okay. It's called the French and Indian War because the French had several major Indian tribes, Native American tribes that were on their side. And so they are very angry. Of course, the British didn't treat them very well either. And there actually is a Native American rebellion right after the war is over to strike back at the British, led by Chief Pontiac. Pontiac's rebellion ends in 1765, but it's a good example of what the British are very scared of. The British are broke, and having to deal with Pontiac's rebellion and then having to deal with the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War earlier on, convinced them that they've got to get North America to calm down. And so they are going to take a pretty conservative approach to how they are going to govern all of this land here that they now are in charge of. Okay. So one of the things that they're going to do, okay, is because it really made their debt bigger, okay, England is going to have to start paying attention to the North American colonies again. After a period of neglect, they're going to have to start paying attention again. And it's not going to go well for the colonists who are used to, by now, an absentee ruler. All this is going to change because they are now going to experience some bitter feelings toward the British because they're back meddling in their affairs. And this is not going to go very well. You can probably guess that, okay? When you look over here, okay, then what really happens, I told you about Pontiac's rebellion, okay, and Pontiac's uprising, okay, and you see that all of these areas, all these little red areas were Native American attacks against British forts out in the Great Lakes region, okay. So you can see why they were very concerned about this, and they wanted to be very careful about what they do next. So the king decides the king and Parliament, okay, decide to issue a proclamation that prohibited the American settlers or the American colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains. And we'll go back to the map here for a second. We'll scroll back for a second, show you where I'm talking about here. I can find it. Okay. Everybody see this line right here? This is what we're talking about. The king essentially draws this line on a map and says, you guys cannot settle west of this. You'd had Pontiac's rebellion break out up here. Okay, you have French outposts out here that haven't been cleared out here as well. If the colonists come blowing out here, they could start an Indian uprising. They could start another war. Okay, these crazy people could end up blowing out here and getting themselves involved in a war with Spain. So the English are going to try to, in the wake of the French and Indian War, try to get the American colonists to calm down. And that is not going to go as well as they had hoped. Okay, the Americans, after being on their own for so long, see themselves as being denied the opportunity to push out here. Okay, because there's the line right there. Okay, there's the proclamation line right there. Okay, and so yes, the Americans are trying to push out here, and the British are going to tell them pretty quick that you cannot go past this line. Okay, and the Americans, like I said, see conspiracies now in everything. Okay, the British are going to do several things. Okay, to try to put the American colonies back under their control. Number one, they're going to reinforce the Navigation Acts. Okay, they are going to reinforce the Navigation Acts, which said that the American colonies could only trade with British ships, British crews. They could only send their stuff to England, and they had to buy all their stuff from England. So they're going to put this back into place, okay? And that raises money. If you are, if you are forcing these guys to send you cheap raw materials and then buy your finished products, then that's good for your economy. But it's slow. And so the second thing that Parliament tells the colonies is you are going to have to pay taxes. You are going to have to pay for some of your own defense. And so you guys are going to have to start paying taxes. And that is going to go over like a lead balloon. Okay, that is not going to be very popular. Now, I don't want it to sound like the Americans are anti-tax. They are, but they did pay taxes already. And they pay taxes to their own colonial governments. But they felt like their own colonial governments represented them. Parliament, though, different story. They're over here. Parliament is way over there in England. They don't send a representative to Parliament. So how can Parliament tax them? And that fundamental question there, which kind of springs out of the Enlightenment and out of some of the stuff that we talked about in an earlier lecture, this is going to lead to some real questions that are going to end up causing the American Revolution. All right, we'll stop here, and the next thing that you're going to see is an explanation about the exam. Okay, and we're going to go through the study guide and talk a little bit about that.